Hi, everybody, and thanks for joining us this afternoon for the next in a series of webinars that Cymtec is putting on throughout 2011. I'm Andrew Rubin. I'm the CEO of Cymtec, and today's topic is going to be cloud-enabled next-generation IDS. There's really two components to this story. Obviously, the buzzword of cloud in of itself could probably be an entire series of webinars. And at the same time, we're going to talk about a technology that in of itself has been around for quite some time. IDS is a technology, some people would say a solution, that has been around for decades, literally, at least in its earliest form, and certainly has had a revival of sorts as a result of all of the conversation around reporting and audit compliance and regulatory reporting that's come to pass over the last couple of years. The combination of this very new thing and this very old thing makes for a very interesting conversation about how do you deal with these two things together. And so as we jump into the webinar, what we're going to do is try and tackle the two issues one at a time. And so it's probably helpful to at least have a little bit of level setting about what is the cloud itself, independent of IDS or what else you choose to put in it. And there's really two key points that we always like to start off by making, which is the cloud, although it probably in of itself is the most creative marketing term ever created around technology, is really an incredibly unique way of saying, I'm going to take an application that I run in my own data center, and I'm going to hand it off to somebody else and let them run it in theirs. In other words, this isn't as if we have found some new creative way to make software work. It's not some new ingenious model that allows software to exist in a state that it never did. What it does is it takes something that traditionally you've had to install, maintain, and really own yourself, and it allows you to buy a slice of it from somebody who's doing the exact same thing for you. And of course, when we talk about cloud-enabled software, what we're really saying is we're simply going to take the burden that you used to absorb yourself, and we're going to stick that burden on somebody else, in this case, the provider of the solution. And so when you look at it, I mean, obviously, this is no longer a trend. This isn't a fad. This isn't something that's coming. It's here. It's now. People are doing this with all sorts of applications, from the most mundane, basic pieces of infrastructure to some of the most complicated software solutions available. And so you start looking at it and saying, well, why is it happening? Why are people moving to the cloud for so many different things? And there's a very obvious list of efficiencies. I don't need to go around this circle and list them off one at a time. We can talk about all the obvious things very quickly: efficiencies, real estate reduction, less support costs, all the things that are obvious. What's a little less obvious are some of those other things. Like, for instance, what happens when you have a model all of a sudden for a piece of enterprise software, something that typically was very expensive and very difficult in the past, and now not only can you acquire it less expensively, but going a step further, you actually go and you pay as you use it. You can scale your use over time and scale your expense over time. That's a benefit that until you're actually using a cloud-based solution, you almost don't realize how much gain there really is. One of the things that we like to talk about, because it definitely, without a doubt, ties to the cloud and in particular to IDS, is we look at things like agile deployment of new technologies. In other words, in the old days, there was a lot that went into simply bringing a piece of technology into an infrastructure or into an IT shop. Whereas nowadays, in a sense, you literally flip a switch, or in this case, sit down in front of a browser and log on into some portal, and instantaneously you flip that switch to a whole new technology platform. So there are some things that go beyond just saving money and making life easier that are really important. They're important from the customer standpoint. They're certainly important from the group of people, the vendors, the resellers, the integrators that support those customers as well. It really is, in a sense, a whole new way of operating. So one of the arguments that you constantly hear is everything is going to end up in the cloud. It's so efficient, it's so perfect, it's so wonderful that why wouldn't literally everything exist in the cloud? Well, we're going to argue that it can't all be 100% good news. I mean, there's really, without a doubt, first of all, legacy. There's legacy in everything. No matter how advanced systems get, there's always going to be legacy. There's going to be reasons both economically and just simply because of time where organizations can't move everything. So to think that we're going to be in some completely homogeneous world of everything existing in the cloud, maybe we will be one day, but it's certainly not months, and it's probably not even years away. It may be decades away. And then from there, we look at if this is the mix, if this is the world that we're all going to be living in and supporting, where some things will be in the cloud, some things will remain inside of your infrastructure, what does it take to manage that? And one of the things that we always point out, even within the context of purchasing our Scout product, something that is completely cloud-enabled, we always remind the customer that the network is the core of everything, that the more that you put in the cloud, the more that you rely on the network to allow your users to get to what they use to do their job, the more important the network itself becomes. And so you can take a very obvious example. You put a salesperson down in front of Salesforce.com, and if that internet connection doesn't work or that network connection isn't up and running, that person can no longer access the most important piece of software in their lives. We look at the network and we say that as a result of all this movement to the cloud, the network just becomes more and more important. And of course, as a result of that, the investment in the network and the ability to see it, control it, monitor it, secure it, all these things feed on one another. So it's a very interesting dynamic that we have going on. And so we come to the beginning of how do you decide what belongs in the cloud. And of course, this all will relate very specifically to why do we believe that IDS should live in the cloud. So when we talk about what belongs in the cloud and what does the cloud really give you, the last few slides obviously highlight some of these things, but let's make it very real. Let's make it very specific. If 10 years ago I came to you and you were running the IT and networking department of an organization, and I approached you and the vice president of sales of this company, and I said, I've got this great piece of functionality. Put simply, it's going to be a system that allows the people who sell your product for this particular company, XYZ, to go and sit down in front of a screen, and they're going to input every single thing they're doing and working on straight into this system. And as the vice president of sales, you're going to be able to pull reports and analytics and all kinds of information. It's going to take a very, very disparate, very difficult system traditionally, and it's going to put it all in one place, centralize it, and let you look at it in a bunch of different ways. Vice president of sales is going to be jumping up and down and saying, this is great, it's efficient, it's going to make my life easier. 10 years ago, the IT person sitting there would be having a coronary. And the reason why is simply put because software like that, CRM, and you can add ERP and other systems like this, those systems were traditionally sold as enterprise software. So what does that mean? They were big. They were heavy. They had long deployment cycles. We all have stories of 6 months of on-site consultants just to get the software up and running. They were difficult. They were expensive. The list goes on. And if you got through all the pain of deploying it, the only thing worse was the maintaining of it after the fact. And so it wasn't the functionality. The functionality was fantastic, huge value to the organization. The problem was what it took to get the functionality in-house. And of course, the follow-up to that particular story is that a very, very smart gentleman in California figured out that if I take this big, heavy solution, I put it into this thing that at the time was really more hosted or SaaS-based. Now, of course, it's called cloud-based. What I can do is I can do two things. Number one, I can solve the pain of each one of these organizations by essentially bearing that pain myself, but then selling them a slice of the functionality, giving them what they want without the headache that they don't need. But there's a second component to the story as well, one that doesn't get talked about as much, which is at the time that these systems were installed and maintained as big, heavy enterprise software systems, they were targeted towards big, heavy organizations because those were the only ones that could really absorb what it took to bring this functionality in-house. Now you fast forward to today, and every single organization, no matter how big or small, wants access to this information. They want to be able to track what's going on with their sales. They want to be able to see what's happening in terms of their pipeline. And of course, by putting that particular piece of software in the cloud, not only did you make it easier for the big shops, but you literally made it available for the first time to the small shops. You were able to deliver for the first time downstream truly an enterprise solution that scaled as well for the small to mid-sized market as it did for the large. And the value of being able to do that is a universal value. So we look at product, we look at technology, we look at solutions, and what we say is what belongs in the cloud is where that value proposition is that staggering. And that's not necessarily everything, but it certainly applies to things like CRM, and arguably it applies to IDS just as well, and we'll talk about that in a moment. So what are some of the benefits? And they're very obvious. The reduction and the reducing of IT costs and all the different ways that that happens, we've already talked about. I'd like to add a couple of quick things to the list. I think ensuring customer, end user, employee productivity The cloud enables you to not only do these things very efficiently, but it really takes that burden again and it moves it on the provider side, so that when we're talking about an enterprise piece of software, something that traditionally would require a lot of work just to simply keep up and running, you're going into it knowing that you're going to provide your end users with something that theoretically should perform at 100% all the time. I also want to talk about the speed up of the delivery of new applications. This goes to one of the points on the early slide. The ability to test something, to try it out, to simply say, if I were to have this in-house, would it really deliver what we need? In the old days, that meant literally deploying a mini system. In today's model, in a cloud-enabled world, it means that you flip a switch, you get a 30-day free pass from your cloud-based application provider, and you sit down and you start using the tool. And if you love it, you buy it, and if you don't, you simply walk away from it. The ability to test and then from there to roll out has changed so dramatically. It's become so dynamic and easy to really figure out what is this new application and is it something that I want. And of course, one of the last benefits is that you get to take that same burden of operation and essentially move it over on the compliance side as well. Now, because we're going to talk about IDS, there's an entire separate compliance and reporting conversation we're going to have. But the point that we're making here is that when you're running applications, especially ones that have lots of data and sometimes sensitive data within them, if you run them in-house, you have certain obligations from an audit and compliance standpoint to obviously protect that data, keep it a certain way, make sure it's secure. If you enable a cloud-based application that has that same data, what you've done is you've also taken the burden of making sure that data is secure and safe and backed up, and you've given that to the provider. So there is an efficiency that goes beyond just the cost. It's also the efficiency of relying on a provider to do their job. Now, of course, the catch to that is you have to know who your provider is. You need to know that when you buy a CRM system in the cloud, that there is a difference in buying it from Salesforce versus somebody else that may be smaller, maybe a little less expensive, but might not be taking care of your data the same way that Salesforce is. So it does require a little homework. You need to make sure that you're comfortable with the provider you're doing business with. But if you are, it's a really nice thing to be able to say that burden's been moved out of your shop. And so, of course, with that set up and obviously touching the Scout story a little bit throughout, let's talk about Scout. And basically what we did with Scout is we essentially said enterprise network IDS in a lot of ways has the attributes of a technology that really belongs in the cloud. Number one, it has all those same qualities that traditionally the big enterprise software did. It's big, it's heavy, it's expensive. Most people who deployed it in the past, especially in the old days, so to speak, would complain about the cost of getting it up and running, and in particular the cost of keeping it up and running. So all those things that made it very difficult and inefficient, IDS at some point in time has been painted with that brush. What we did is we said by putting it in the cloud, you're going to eliminate that resource strain. Certainly the same story that we've been talking about now for a few minutes. The thing that we really believe very strongly, and that second point that you see on the slide, though, is this. IDS is a technology. It's not a solution. It's not a platform. It's a technology. And it really is a technology that is not in of itself a network security technology. People talk about network security. They think firewall. They think IPS, which is intrusion prevention. They think about the tools that actively block and stop threats trying to get into their network. IDS has always been a passive technology. It's a reporting tool. It's a visibility tool. It's a forensic tool for digging into what might be happening on the network. But in a lot of ways, it's not a pure traditional network security tool. So what we've done is we've looked at our platform, and we call it a platform because it goes beyond just pure IDS, and we've said, are there other aspects of visibility? Are there other pieces of reporting that we can bring in to take the tool further? Take the cloud-enabled model, grab all the efficiencies, and then build beyond just simply a pure IDS system. So what we say is a few things. First of all, we like the what if you could or what if you had list because we try and make this very simple and very non-technical. We want to make it about the value proposition first. So what if you had the reliability of a scalable enterprise tool without any of the investment or the ongoing aggravation? What if you could deploy IDS anywhere in the world and basically all it was snapping in an appliance, it's passively plugged into your network, it calls home, and instantaneously you're up and running. The entire enterprise system by basically snapping in a 1U rack mount appliance. What if you could generate site-specific or global reporting and you could do it throughout your entire deployment from one place. Obviously, customers nowadays have data centers and systems and production all over the world. So having a tool like IDS that may be in 12 different places, and then being able to say, I want a report for 1 out of 12 sites, and then right next to it, I need a report for 12 out of 12 sites, getting the data is not the hard part. Sifting through it, analyzing it, and putting it in the correct picture frames, that's where it's difficult. So what if you could do all that very easily? What if you had the backing of Gartner-endorsed research signatures and definitions embedded in your solution, but without the cost that typically comes with getting it? And of course, what if you could run an enterprise IDS tool with the benefits of what we call a multi-tenant architecture? So in other words, what happens when you have a data center in London, one in New York, and one in Hong Kong, and you realize that the person that's looking at the data in London is not the same person as the one in Hong Kong? Do I have to deploy 3 different systems? Do I deploy one system, but when the person logs in, the system is smart enough to know which data set to present them on screen? So what if you could do all this, and you could do it in a very scalable but very controlled way? And when you wrap it all up, what we're really saying is, what if you could deliver to your organization a best-in-breed IDS, truly an enterprise-class tool, do it with the guaranteed uptime, reliability, and continued improvement in the product over time, but not have any of the resource strain that comes with it. As a matter of fact, not have any resource strain at all. And that's really the story of how Scout got built. So when we talk about it in some detail, let's talk about, what is it that it really delivers. So cloud delivery model combined with tools, portal, reporting functions, some very obvious things. But let's kind of talk about the 2 consumers of IDS. So if you're the customer, or for that matter, if you're the organization servicing the customer, whether it's in-house or outsourced, what is it that this thing really gives you? I mean, where's the value in it? So the cloud's great. That's the delivery model. But why does somebody buy it? And typically, IDS has 2 consumers. It might be within the same organization. Sometimes an organization only has one. Sometimes they have the other. Sometimes they have both. But there's really 2 consumers of this. There's the IT or the networking group. In other words, the people who actually make the stuff work every day. And then there's the audit, compliance, and regulatory reporting group, if that group even exists. For many customers nowadays, for many organizations, that group does exist because so many different industries are now subject to regulatory reporting rules. So let's talk about what you get out of it. Number 1, let's give the administrator, the person actually running the network or the environment, the ability to find, stop security threats, performance issues before they impact the business's continuity. In other words, let's get enough information out of the system to be able to proactively see some of the things going on that might cause problems down the road. Let's provide instant and comprehensive visibility into violations, as well as that role-based dashboard so that we can get the right information in front of the right person in the organization in real time. Obviously, a very, very big hot button going to that second group of consumers would be anything at all that you can do to streamline compliance and regulatory reporting. For so many organizations nowadays, PCI, Sarbanes-Oxley, HIPAA, there's so many cryptic rules about things like IDS. Do we have to have it? If we do, what are we required to pull from it and when? So one of the things that you hear very often is, I just want to check the box. I want to be able to say, I've got it, it's there, and whether it's 3 months or 3 years from now, when someone eventually shows up and says, can you prove to me you've got it, I can prove it. And so the ability to do that, but do it very efficiently, where you're not dedicating a human being to sitting there babysitting a solution like this every day on the off chance that 3 years from now you have to produce one report. So it's not just getting the reports, it's getting them as efficiently as possible. And of course, any system like this is going to add a lot of value by being able to alert you, being able to basically wake you up, so to speak, maybe literally and maybe figuratively, but to get you when it needs you. So in other words, whether it's the customer monitoring the alerts themselves, potentially an outsourced partner or consultant doing it for them, and in some cases, having information from a tool like this feed into an outsourced monitoring organization, somebody that is sitting there watching it 24/7, 365, getting the alerts, and being in a position to decide what to do with the information and how or when to escalate it. The trick here is not getting the data into the tool, it's getting the information out and getting it into the right hands. So when we talk about faster, easier, and immediate ROI, these are terms with IDS that typically haven't been associated. We want you to spend the time using the solution, not maintaining it, which is typically where all the cycles have gone. And beyond that, we look at, where can you go, as I said earlier, with IDS by itself to really enhance it. So, for instance, this is a network tool. It basically sniffs traffic and compares it to a list of signatures in order to generate the events and the information that you eventually see. Well, with Scout, what we've tried to do is take as many of the pieces of the puzzle and create visibility around them as possible. So instead of just generating a string of IDS events, why not generate some traffic analysis and diagnostic information about the traffic itself? Perhaps a host is spending a lot of time shooting out a lot of traffic, but there isn't an IDS event attached to it just yet. Maybe there never will be. The point is, the fact that a particular host is eating up a tremendous amount of traffic by itself is probably interesting to the same group of people who would look at a tool like this. And eventually, we look at things like Layer 7 and application visibility, and we feel like they all tie together. There's no doubt about it that performance and security within a network are colliding. And as we said earlier, the more that organizations put into the cloud, including products like IDS, the more important the network itself becomes. So the network is becoming the core of everything, and the more visibility and the more reporting you have about how it's behaving, the better off you're going to be. A couple of very quick bullets on the actual solution itself. So like most cloud-enabled tools, the bulk of it is the part that you really never see or touch. The one piece with IDS that, of course, has to be there is an appliance sitting in the network. We need a device that essentially generates the data that ends up populating that portal that you sit down in front of. In the Salesforce example or the analogy, the device is actually a human being. It's a salesperson who sits down and keys the information in. In our case, the appliance represents that. It's a 1U rack mount appliance. We pre-configure it based on where it's going to be sitting in the client's network, and we ship it out ready to go. It plugs in passively. This is not deployed in line. It can't take the network down. It can't create latency. It can't do anything that's going to hurt the network itself. All it will do is simply stop working in the worst case scenario. But the nice part about it is, deployed promiscuously or passively, the risk to the environment is zero. Of course, behind the appliance, you've got the other pieces. So you've got the cloud portal, which essentially is the browser-based interface that you use to administer the tool, use the tool, pull your reports. It's your portal into all that information. And then on the subscription updates, I want to point out one very important thing. Most people who have any touch to IDS in the past will tell you that IDS is really about two things. How hard is it to use, and how good are the signatures inside of it? Because the signatures really make or break the event data that you end up with. So Cymtec took it upon ourselves to partner with SourceFire for two simple reasons. Number one, we believe that where our strong suit, our strength, is delivering Scout in this cloud-enabled model, and of course all the other pieces that go around that. But where SourceFire brings a strength that we don't have is the ability to research the emerging threats, write the signatures that allow you to detect that, and in particular to go a step further and write definitions. In other words, take some fairly cryptic network security language and turn it into something that becomes real information. Talk about things like systems that are affected by a particular vulnerability. What does the signature mean? Are there patches available for a particular system if you see this vulnerability in your network? In other words, taking the data and really translating it into useful information. And SourceFire does a brilliant job of that. We partnered with SourceFire. We implemented what they call their VRT rule set. That allows us to come in and say, not only do we have what we believe is a really efficient and really easy delivery model for IDS, but you're not being asked to sacrifice anything in exchange for that model. In other words, when we say an enterprise-class tool, it's not just the delivery model that lives up to that. It's also the quality of the research and the quality of the information that it produces. And last but not least, you look at the Cymtec Scout core environment. If we do our job right, this is, of course, the piece that nobody should ever see. Just like any other cloud-enabled software service or cloud-enabled software product, you never want to see this as the customer. You don't even want to know it's there. If we're doing our job right, your data will be secure. It will be backed up appropriately. Your analysis engines will always be working, so that portal will always be waiting for you. And that, of course, is what we call the core environment. That's your back end of the cloud. And tailing out here towards the end, there's just two quick slides. One of them, this one, I'd like to point out that, as it says in the bottom right, there's a lot more information about this on our website. But when we talk about deployment architecture, we've put up 2 out of 3 examples here. Most people deploy these either in an office, in a co-location facility, or at times in their own data center in-house. When people talk about IDS and they look at the deployment, they really look at two things. Where do I put it? In other words, does it go in an office or a data center, or both? And where do I actually plug it into the network? So there's a couple of easy answers. The first one is, typically these things go where the production systems live. So whether it's a data center, a co-location facility, maybe perhaps it's the headquarters office, this is a tool that tends to get focused very heavily on where the most critical, most important traffic is, and typically where the most important applications live within your data center. If you think about what it does and the type of information that it delivers, it's a visibility and a security and analytics tool. There is no doubt about it that this is the type of information that you want about what's living and breathing on the network closest to your most important things. So that's number one. Number two, how do you physically plug it in? Well, we've talked about the fact that it's promiscuous or passive. The actual physical plug-in is very simple. It typically sits behind a firewall. It's connected to a local switch, and that switch typically has a span port that's seeing all the traffic crossing that switch. And as I said before, in passive mode, what we're doing is we're feeding a mirror or a picture of the traffic over to the IDS, but we're not actually processing it in line. And so very low risk, still getting a great visibility tool in terms of the traffic that it sees, and a lot of flexibility about where and how you deploy it. Of course, there are variations on every one of these themes. One last point on deployment before I jump to the final slide. Very often we'll get asked, well, do I put it inside or outside of my firewall? And I mentioned there a moment ago that it tends to be deployed internally. I think the real answer to that question is, in a perfect world, and by perfect, of course, I mean if budget was never an issue, most people would say, I'm as concerned about who's walking up to my front door of my house as I am about who may get through the front door. That's a perfect world. But in reality, when you're forced to make decisions within the context of time and effort and money, what you realize is that if you had to pick which side of the door you really wanted to look at, you're a lot more worried about who makes it past the front door and could now be inside your house than you are about everybody who potentially walks up to the front door, for one very obvious reason. Getting up to the outside of the front door doesn't guarantee you're going to get in. Whereas once they've made it through that front door and they're standing inside the house, theoretically, it gives you a lot of exposure to walk wherever you want to go. We tend to see IDS behind the firewall because that's where most people's concern point is the strongest. But obviously, in a perfect world, it would be great to be able to correlate who's walking up to my firewall versus who makes it through and is now inside of my home. And last but not least, when we talk about the pricing model, obviously nowadays this conversation is a lot easier than it used to be because, quite frankly, people are used to buying through the cloud. Our pricing model follows exactly what you would expect. It's very flat, it's very simple, and we would argue that it's probably the most cost-effective IDS in the market. So first of all, there is a piece of hardware. Obviously, that's a one-time cost. It's a 1U rack mount sensor or piece of hardware appliance. And then, of course, there's an annual subscription. And what's most important is the list on the right, which is that annual subscription, like you would expect nowadays from any cloud-enabled software solution, really includes everything. One of the things that we all know from experience is that when you bought these big, heavy pieces of software, very often the most painful part of the budget conversation was not just the enormous price tag up front. It was all the unpredictable costs, the unplanned costs that would come up along the way, the consultants that had to come in, the extra storage that nobody ever planned on. The really nice part about Scout and about the IDS cloud-enabled delivery model is that it gives you a fixed, single line item, very budgetable cost, and you know exactly what it is at the beginning of every year. And so obviously details and specifics on all of this, the technical information, the pricing information, we can provide you anytime, and it's information that you can get directly from us, or of course if you work with a partner, and if you are a partner and you'd like more detail, we'd be happy to provide it. So with that said, I know that we're right at about 30 minutes, so I want to thank everybody for joining us this afternoon. I hope it was informative, and as I said at the beginning, this is a series that we're running throughout the year. I believe our next one is, if not already scheduled, it will be very shortly, and we hope you'll continue to join us. So thank you very, very much.